Well, hello, and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and TechAdvice.life video interview. Today I'm joined by Reinhart Hansen. He's the Director of Technology in the Office of the CTO for global cybersecurity company, Imperva, now a Thales Company, which protects critical applications, application programming interfaces, or APIs, of course, as we know them, and data. Welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Great to be here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to our discussion, right? There's obviously a lot of scope for what it is we're going to discuss today. And hopefully we can impart some good knowledge or good advice to your listeners and readers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time. And look, before we delve into generative AI, a bad bot report that you've recently released, data security, and more, can you please recap the Imperva story for us now that we're here in already mid 2024?
Yeah, wow. So it's halfway through the year already. It's unbelievable, isn't it? But it's been like a very interesting year for Imperva. Maybe to give a little bit of background, Imperva's, a company that has been in existence for quite a long time. It established in 2002. We've been, recognized as a cybersecurity leader for, over 20 years now. We pioneered the web application firewall market, or WAF as it was known, but that's obviously now evolved into what we now recognize as a new area called WAP. So it's WAF plus API security. So rebranded as WAP. And we also have delved into various areas of data security. And fast forward to 2023, we were acquired by Thales, a global powerhouse, investing in many different areas, but cybersecurity is one of them. So late in 2023, we became a Thales company, and now with a combined portfolio of application security, data security, and identity-based security, I think we're recognized as one of the top 10 cybersecurity vendors globally. So yeah, quite impressive to be part of that group now, and I think it gives us a lot of breadth to offer our customers some very good value in what we do from protecting data and all paths to it, which is essentially our motto, right? It's being able to secure data, but when you look at how you need to secure data, it's being able to secure all the different paths that provide access to data.
And of
Which
course, the AI side of it as well, which we're going to delve much further
yeah,
into. But, speaking about AI, I mean, it's been 20 months since ChatGPT truly burst onto the scene in November 2022. And in that time, of course, the capabilities of ChatGPT itself, let alone the other major players, has continued to evolve and seriously impress, while also, worrying people about whether AI is going to take over the world. But, again, we'll get into all that in a second. And there's also, of course, been the various hallucinatory missteps that showed today's artificial intelligence still has a long way to go before it can be seen as artificial general intelligence, or as according to Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, it's still a decade away from artificial super intelligence. So what has surprised you and impressed you the most about the modern AI revolution thus far when it comes to AI being used for good and to better humanity?
so what's come out of the good? Well, when you look at how it's being used, it's specifically by the scientific community and the medical community. I think there's a lot of positive things that AI can help with from an accelerated research perspective. One of the things I actually was looking at the other day, which was the use of AI to accelerate defining all the different protein structures that exist, right, for basically disease research. And I think there was I think it was DeepMind. Yeah, I think DeepMind from Google actually developed a specific AI to map out all the amino acids that we have on catalog today, and transpose those into all the different protein structures, and even produce a 3D model of the protein structure. Now, in saying that, may not be so significant to a lot of people, but this is an activity that would, on per protein structure, would take a PhD student 3 years of their thesis to complete the mapping of one protein structure. And I think they correlated this out to, taking 2,000 plus years if we were to continue on that path to mapping out all the different protein structures. That's one area where AI has already benefited the scientific and research community, particularly in the field of medical and disease research. So I think that's a really positive thing, right? Really positive.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of AI coming up with new cancer drugs, with new battery chemistries that going to improve the sort of batteries that we're using today. So there's so many advantages, but of course, with every advancement in technology can be used for good and obviously for evil and for bad. And there are obviously dangers and challenges to AI, including securing the AI itself, which I know we're going to talk about. But let's start with the bad bots, with Australia in the top 3 countries being targeted. This is part of your Bad Bots report. We're going to go into more detail with that shortly. But this is the sort of the headline figures about what bad bots are doing. So what is a bad bot, and how big is this bad bot industry halfway through 2024?
Yeah, so for the viewers who aren't familiar with bots or bad bots, I mean, bots are really just an automated piece of software that's specifically designed to perform a task at scale. And today, when we look at the internet, most of, when I say most, 50% or more of the traffic that is going across the internet is bot-based traffic. It's automated traffic,
Good and bad, right?
Good and bad, yeah. So that's right. So there's good and bad bots. I mean, a good bot would be an example. Well, an example of that would be, say, the Google indexer, right? Which, well, most people think it's a good bot, I guess, but it's indexing our websites so that they can be ranked on, on search engine, right? So that's a good example of a good bot, one that we want to allow to access our website and rank its content. But then there's bad bots, right? And of that 50% of internet traffic that's made up of bad bots, around 30% of it is actually bad bot traffic, right? So pretty significant volume and amount of traffic is now, considered to be bad bot related. So bad bots are things that pieces, again, automated pieces of software that are designed to do a not so desirable task, right? And then that might be scraping content from a competitor's website, as an example. It might be performing an automated credential attack against a website that's exposing a logon point, right? So most websites, like even your insurance companies and banks, they all provide a logon point where you've typically got to put in something to identify yourself, a username and password. Bots can abuse that in a scalable way by taking a dictionary of usernames and passwords and automating the input of that into that logon point to validate, to see if they can find one that works, right? And this typically happens at scale at a greater rate when there's been a data breach of some sort globally, right? So when there's a data breach and there's PII data out there, and once your data's out there, it's free for any cyber criminal to see if they can use the information they have on you to log into a service. And if they can, well, they obviously can then cause some immense damage, right? Whether it's identity theft or whether it's financial fraud. But bots allow them to do that at scale, right? So they don't sit there and try your details one at a time. They have an automated process that does this, right? And this is the whole premise of how bad bots work. They're doing something undesirable. Another example might be carding, right? So the payment card industry has to expose to the internet the ability to process payment details, right? Now, cyber criminals, knowing that, can cycle through credit cards that they post to these payment gateways to validate, is it a valid credit card or not? Do I have in my possession a valid credit card? Again, bad bots can do this at scale. And typically when we see credit card data being stolen or out there on the dark web, they're the dictionaries or the lists that are used by cyber criminals typically to validate and see if they can find a card that's active and working. And then obviously, again, that leads to typically some sort of financial crime. So bad bots are a significant problem. The downside, I think, is that most organizations don't actually understand whether their business is exposed to some sort of bad bot type attack on their public facing applications and infrastructure. And like anything, the first step is to use technology to first get visibility and understand what it is that they're being targeted for, and is that being caused by a bad bot type attack on their infrastructure or applications.
And then in news that just came to light today as we're recording, there's been a vulnerability discovered in OpenSSH, which is on Linux servers. And this vulnerability has lasted for 4 years. They're calling it regression, like SSH, regression, because it's something that has sort of, it was patched some years ago, and they figured out some sort of way to break into it again. And it's giving the bad guys full access into these servers. So I'm sure that the IT admins around the world are scrambling to fix this, if they even know about it yet. And there are bad bots being spun up right now to try and discover all of the vulnerable servers, and for the theft of IP to take place at scale.
Yeah. So another really good example of where bots can be used to do the reconnaissance, right? So again, an individual cyber criminal is going to have limited ability to go out there and try and do the reconnaissance to see who's running an open SSH version that's vulnerable. But bots can do that quite easily, right? And when you link that back to AI is helping cyber criminals, even those that don't have very much programmatic background, to develop and write these bots, right? Pretty much ready to use at the whim of a prompt, right? So all they need to do is provide an appropriate prompt to a large language model, like let's use Llama, right, from Meta as an example. Llama, the code generator. If you provided an appropriate prompt, it'll write you a piece of code that, if it's not already to be ready to be used, it'll be 90% there, and with very little manipulation and touching up, you've got a bot, right, that can go out there and search for vulnerable SSH endpoints, open SSH endpoints, and there you've got your list of like attack targets, right, that you then go after. And unfortunately for some, that turns into a breach and a data breach, right?
Yeah, ransomware, data exfiltration, blackmail. One of the things you talk about is securing not just data in rest, but data in motion. And that motion means it's going to cloud servers, it's going to AI systems. The data is moving around. It's not just sitting in a data lake. It's being moved. And so how do you actually secure the AI and secure all that data in motion? One of the things that, we're in 2024, things keep evolving and changing. What do we need to know about that?
Data security, or data security, depending on which part of the world you come from, and which accent you use for describing data. It doesn't get enough focus, right, in my mind, right? I mean, we've seen these massive data breaches in Australia, right? And you'd think we'd learn from it, but we still, as an industry, I think, don't pour enough effort into directly protecting data and consumer data, right? Specifically, right? Because let's face it, consumer data is what cyber criminals are typically after, right? They're not interested in stealing your network or stealing your endpoint. If they do compromise those in order to get to the data behind them, the organization's going to get those back at some point. But once the data leaks out the door, it's out the door forever. You're not getting that back, right? So in my mind, and I see this and still see it, CIOs and CISOs are still struggling to seemingly invest in people with the right skills, technology, and process within their organization to actually protect data, right? And that means data in databases, data in data lakes, data that's in files and folders. So all your different types of data, structured, semi-structured, unstructured. But there's just not enough focus on that, right? And there's still, if you look at the funding that goes into a cybersecurity strategy or a cybersecurity execution plan, a large part of it, or a large portion of it, is still poured into things that are around data, right?
Yeah,
Again,
the perimeter, the firewalls,
the peripheral aspects. So like your network perimeter, the firewall, your network itself, right, which you might use IPS or IDS to protect. Your endpoint, which you've got malware detection and some sort of endpoint protection on. But when it comes to data, most organizations kind of stop, if they do it at all, at encryption, right?
Yeah, I mean, they might
And
also have some systems that are checking for data being emailed out. So there are some things that people, companies have been
Or
doing for
DLP,
years.
right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's right. DLP, Dallas.
you're
Yeah, yeah,
touching on DLP there,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
that for many years has been the cornerstone of most organizations or most enterprises' data protection or data security strategy, right?
Hmm.
But when you look at it, it hasn't really been that effective, has it? Because if it had been, we wouldn't see these huge data breaches that continuously happen
Yeah.
globally, right? As well as now in Australia, right? Recently, right? I think we've had a large wake up call there, right? The technology's been around for a long time, DLP, right? But largely, if you measure it on its efficacy, it's not really shaping up to be what it needs to be, right? So we need to look at other ways to protect data, right? And minimize, what I guess refer to as the blast radius when we are breached. And I say when we are breached because I think most organizations in the industry in general has kind of accepted that it's not if you get breached, it's when you get breached,
Yeah.
right? So the dwell time that it takes for most organizations to even understand that they have been breached can be 12 months,
Yeah.
18 months,
And the hackers
right?
have been there on the network
And
sifting
that's
through.
way too long, right?
Yeah.
That is way too long, right? I think everybody would agree with that. So how do you bring that down, right? And I think to something reasonable where you can act on it sooner and reduce that blast radius, right? And I think the massive missing component in most data security strategies is actually having eyes on the data. Who's accessing it? Which users are accessing it? Which applications are accessing it? Having that audit trail that can then be used by machine learning and AI, all those data points that we get out of monitoring access to data can be used to identify anomalous data access when there is access happening that's out of behavior or perhaps it's misuse of data, right? But only through monitoring data access can we establish that and very quickly identify when there's a breach or when there's something that could lead to a breach and shut it down, right? Shut it down then and there, reducing that blast radius. And it's a big missing component, I can tell you, from pretty much most enterprise, data security strategies and plans that they have in place that they're
Yeah.
executing today. Right?
Most of these things are reactive, and you'd hope that with AI, it could be predictive and predict some of these things and put extra, visibility onto specific types of data or specific ways that it's being exfiltrated. But what does Imperva offer to the market that deals with this? Because you're obviously talking about it, you must have a solution for it.
Yeah, well, for sure. It starts with, I guess, the bread and butter, which definitely is encryption, making sure you've got your data encrypted at rest and also in
In
motion.
motion, yeah.
So you definitely need to do that, and you need to manage that effectively from a key management perspective, because when you encrypt something, you need to always make sure that you've got keys that can unencrypt or decrypt it.
Decrypt it, yeah.
So, having good key management around your data assets is imperative, right? If you want to manage the encryption cycle, encrypt and decrypt. But then, you need to look further than that, and you need to look at, again, as I was saying, monitoring access to your data, right? So you understand when there's something untoward happening with data access in the environment, and you can use machine learning and AI, which is exactly what Imperva does, to detect that anomalous access, the misuse of data, and take action on it before it turns into a media breaking
Disaster,
data.
yeah. And so, is this one particular product you have which sits within sort of a best of breed approach of various programs that people, in their enterprises and businesses are using, or is this part of a platform that you are offering to people, which looks after
Yeah,
I don't
good
know, the
question.
entire stack?
Yeah, so from a data, life cycle perspective, it is part of a platform. The first step is data discovery and classifying what data you have, right? Understanding where your data is. Is it in an on-premise data center? Is it in one of the number of different cloud service provider or hyperscaler
Yeah, is it
environments?
hybrid? Where is it? Is it sitting in various data
Yeah,
lakes? Or,
right. So that's the first step, identifying it, and that's certainly one big piece of the puzzle we can help with. And then once you've identified where especially your sensitive data is, your critical data is, then you can look at, okay, well, do we have the right controls in place around that data? Are we encrypting it? are we tokenizing or masking it to make sure we're in line with things like the Data Privacy Act, right? So we can do that once we understand what the data is and the sensitivity and the of the data. We can help put in place very quickly a mitigation control to make sure it conforms to regulation or to making sure that data is kept secure
in the correct jurisdictions and all that.
Yeah, so with GDPR type, I guess GDPR type regulatory requirements,
and data sovereignty is what I was referring to.
making their way into the Australian Data Privacy Act. Things like, a user's IP address, right, is now considered PII data. Whereas a handful of years ago that was not considered to be a personally identifiable piece of information, right?
Yeah.
And that changes the ballpark and the game when it comes to how you need to treat, the entire data set that's now considered to be personal information or personal, PII data. So discovering it's the first piece, obviously, going into then putting in the right mitigating controls like encryption and tokenization, but then taking it a step further and actually starting to monitor all data access, right? Again, that's the biggest gap that I see, the biggest blind spot within most enterprises. And everyone has, most enterprises today have a security operations center that's essentially flying blind to how data is being used in their environment. They've got a second guess, right? And this is why actually, when you see a data breach, like some of the big ones that we've seen, locally, you'll always see
they have to do an investigation to figure it out. They don't know, right?
Well, they do, right? But most of the time, they don't have the operational data to actually tell them how much data was actually taken out of the environment because they're not monitoring data access. They don't have that audit trail, that audit log that can help them establish that, right? And this is why we see when there are data breaches, it's not like, 5,064 records were taken. It's like a very rounded number, like 1 million or 2 million or 9.6 million, right? Because they don't actually know exactly how much data has been taken, but they've got to assume based on what they've seen out in the wild from the data set that they have internally, right? Usually cyber criminals will give them a taste of what they have stolen. They may not reveal the entire data set, but based on what they're seeing out on the dark web, or the cyber criminals that are maybe holding them at ransom have shown them that they've got to assume that based on where the source of that data came from within their environment, the entire environment was compromised. And that's why you see these huge rounded numbers, that get published around how many records were breached, right? And that has a big, effect on how you perform your incident response, right, and your breach response. Right, because if you're responding to a breach of 10 million records versus 1,000 records, not only is the cost a lot more dramatic, right? But
that blast radius is
the blast radius is a lot bigger than what it probably actually is. But you've got to assume it's as big as what it is because you don't know any different, right?
Yeah. So can I ask, how mature is your platform? How long have you when did this platform go into business? Into operation? I mean, we've obviously had DLP technology for some time, which, as you explained, hasn't been working. And so, one of the reasons Thales bought you must be because your platform is very strong. And no doubt, since they've, it's been 6-7 months since they've bought you, they would have wanted to help you improve it even further. But what's the level of sophistication and maturity of the Imperva platform, and what is it called?
Yeah, so it's called Data Security Fabric. It's definitely one of the reasons Thales acquired Imperva. When you look at what Thales already did from a data security perspective, which was typically your encryption of data in motion, data at rest, as well as the key management around managing encrypting that data. Bringing Imperva into the fold and Data Security Fabric was kind of a no-brainer for them, I think, because it was a natural progression and extension of where the industry probably needs data security to go, right? If we're going to be more effective at detecting data breaches and misuse of data before it turns into a massive event.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost a marriage made in heaven, you could say, right? To some degree, because it's very complementary to the existing Thales capabilities, and it really allows now Thales to provide a very, very well-rounded data security portfolio of capability to their customer base.
And when did the data protection fabric platform launch from Imperva?
Well, I mean, it's got a a progressional history behind it that stems back to
An evolution, yeah.
the late 2000s is kind of when it first established as a database activity monitoring platform. That's now evolved into monitoring more than just databases, right? So that was focused on structured data in databases. We're now shifting to doing that with unstructured data, so files and folders and so on. But the secret sauce behind all that today really is the analytics, right? That machine learning and AI provides, because it's all great collecting all this data and all these data points on how data is being accessed. And to be brutally honest, that's a lot of information just in doing that, right?
Just to conclude on the platform, what is a typical customer onboarding journey? I mean, I know it's different for everybody, but there must be some sort of typical things you could explain. And then, I don't know if you want to mention any customers you have in Australia or globally, but what industries are you working with?
Industry-wise, I won't mention customers, but industry-wise, it's the financial services and banking and that are the leaders, right? In really what I would consider more broadly data security, because they're so heavily regulated and they have so many different government as well as industry regulations to abide by.
Globally, yeah.
They're forced to do something about it, and because of that, they're really the leaders, I think, in data security overall. And from an adoption perspective for them, it's implementing obviously the infrastructure that's required to run data security fabric, Imperva's solution. But then it goes through that cyclic journey of first understanding what data they have through discovery and classification, making sure that the data that they've discovered is appropriately protected at rest, right? Whether it's again tokenization or encryption or masking the data, and then they progress to monitoring all the data in their environment. Now, typically, your financial services organizations monitor access to data that's associated with critical services that they provide, right? And this kind of overlaps a little bit, I think, and eats into a little bit the requirement that a lot of critical infrastructure entities now have in owning, more so owning their data security to a heightened maturity level. So that they can conform to critical infrastructure type requirements that's now being put on them by the government, right? So the Critical Infrastructure Act is encompassing a whole bunch of different, industry verticals and business types, for everything from your food and groceries to your typical, utilities like electricity and gas, as well as banks. But anything that's seen by the government as a critical service entity is now, subjected to owning a much more mature risk management framework around their IT infrastructure, and data security is definitely a large focus of that, and uplifting that to a standard that hopefully will get us to the point where we're not seeing these massive data breaches anymore, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the Imperva solution, the Thales solution, is one of the ways that companies can implement the platform and then achieve regulatory compliance, but also be able to tell their boards and their customers that we have a system in place that is specifically helping us to protect your data in a way that is proactive and vastly better than what we had before the pandemic, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And as again, I like to bring it back to being able to minimize that blast radius, right? And that's what banks are very good at. They're very good at risk management, risk mitigation. And this is really an extension of that into the data assets that they have. Yeah.
Now, you have released the Imperva Bad Bot Report for 2024. I'll have a link to that in the description of this video and in the article. And, what are some of the headline findings? I suppose we don't want to go too in depth because people can read it for themselves, but tell us.
Yeah, I think I touched on some of them already, but I mean,
Mm,
yeah, some background on that. I mean, I think it's now the 11th year that we've released that global bad bot report. That goes into the various industries and what we're seeing from a bad bot attack landscape. And every industry typically has a different problem when it comes to managing bots or the types of bad bot type activity that's targeting them. And this will vary from retailers having different challenges to banks and financial institutions, right? As an example. I did talk a little bit about some of the challenges like content scraping and credential stuffing, where credentials are being tested against a logon point and so on. But if you look at some of the online retailers, they also have problems with inventory scalping, right? Where bad bots will come in, pretend they're a human, right? And they'll put a hold on a whole bunch of inventory, or they'll buy up a whole bunch of inventory, and that means that they'll typically hold that or take that inventory and resell it on another website at a marked up price. And there's no inventory left for the organization's real
customers.
uh, consumers and, and,
Yeah.
and customers.
I mean,
So
ticket
this
scalping is a good example of that.
typical ticket scalping is a huge example of that. And bots have using AI, worked out ways to jump the queue, so to speak, right? I mean, I'm sure we've all been online to buy tickets for a major event and have seen how frustrating that can be when you get put into a queue. And then only hours later to work out that all the tickets have been sold.
In the first 10
And
minutes.
yeah, right. In the first 10 minutes. And that's because of bots,
Yeah.
right? It's because bots are pre-registered with the likes of these, ticketing companies, major online companies that sell tickets to events. They've registered using a bot to register an identity, like a login, and they use all these logins at the time that a major event gets published to, at scale, go and buy tickets,
Yeah.
right? And not only have they got these identities pre-lined up to use in major event purchases, but they then also have worked out ways to jump the queue, right? So you as a normal user sit there with you're in the queue, you're getting this feedback, or you've now moved
Just on your
to
regular browser.
like position 100 of 1000
Mm.
and you're slowly getting to the front of the queue. But bots have worked out through targeting and manipulating the APIs that these ticketing systems use as part of their interface. They've worked out how to jump the queue. Now it's unfair, right? It really is. It's unfair to the normal consumer, who probably doesn't really appreciate or understand that this is happening in the background, right? All they know is that at the end of the day, they're probably angry and disgruntled because they haven't got their tickets to the latest AC/DC concert or
Taylor
Taylor Swift
Swift, yeah.
event,
And
right?
then,
But
you'd think with generative AI, people would be creating really sophisticated bots. But according to your own stats, I mean, the simple bots increased in volume, from 33.4% in 2022 to 39.6 in 2023. No doubt it's getting closer to 50%. And your report shows that Australia has a high volume of these simple bots, 70%, 31% higher than the global average. And these are targeting business, retail, and lifestyles, which was exactly what you were just talking about.
simple bots, are ones that AI code generation AI tools can very quickly help cyber criminals, produce
And when you
from
explained this
scratch, right?
before, some of the AIs will say, no, I'm not going to create that piece of code for you because it's malware, but they can get it to create different parts of the code and then join it all
Yeah,
together themselves afterwards, which is very
yeah,
sneaky.
that's right. Yeah, look, there is that. There's obviously guardrails in a lot of these large language models now to hopefully prevent them from being misused for purposes like we're discussing. But the fact is, there's a lot of large language models out there that even Meta's own Llama, right, that was
Open
that
source, people can use
was
it to do
leaked
whatever they
or
want. Yeah,
exactly right. It's open source, so cyber criminal can take that,
and
and
modify it.
there's no guardrails, right? Or they can quite easily today use attack types on the large language model using prompt injection to
Yeah,
bypass the
to
guardrails,
to
right? There's some
jailbreak
really
it, to jailbreak
there's
it.
some really well published mechanisms to now do it. One's called obliteration, and for those viewers that are not familiar with it, I won't go into it here because it's quite detailed, but lookup obliteration, and that is a mechanism by which you can bypass the guardrails on pretty much any large language model that's published out there.
And another trend is the gaming industry. Your stats show that globally, gaming received the highest proportion of bad bot traffic, 57.2%. But in Australia, this is 75%. I mean, that's two-thirds
amazing,
or
isn't it?
more.
The reason behind that.
Tell me.
I mean, not many people probably click, right? But I think there was the report done. I think it was by Credit Suisse only last year, and it clearly showed that per capita, Australian adults are the most wealthy in the world, right? The median wealth of an Australian adult is the highest, I think, out of all countries in the world, right?
No wonder we're such a target for ransomware.
Well, exactly right. So this is the point, right? So cyber criminals are not dumb. They know this. They have access to that information as well. It's public, right? So knowing that, well, that's why we're targeted, right? Because if they're managed to get a successful, scam out of someone, or they're successfully able to target them, there's going to be a nice payday at the end of it, right? As opposed to targeting someone in a third world country who probably maybe doesn't even have a bank account. It's all based on numbers.
Follow the money.
Follow the money, right? Follow the money. But that's exactly why Australians are such huge targets for cyber criminals, right? Because they know the payday, if they succeed, is high. Or the rate of success is high.
Yeah. Now, APIs are a popular vector for attack. Bad bot traffic originating from residential ISPs is growing. I mean, do you want to touch on a couple more things before we head towards the end of the interview?
Yeah, well, I mean, so APIs, right? I mean, APIs are a huge target now for attacks. And
that's what happened with Optus, one of the companies.
Automated attacks. Yeah, I mean, we spoke about reconnaissance, right? Bots, capable, simple bots, right, that AI can generate for cyber criminals, are used for doing that high-level reconnaissance on identifying what API endpoints are in existence within an organization. And again, that gives them a starting point in where they can target, right? Where they can do a deeper, probably more advanced attack or exploit in order to compromise the API. And guess what's behind the API? Data.
Valuable data.
And this is the thing that I think most organizations have now started to realize, is that data security is now expanding out to API security, right? Because APIs are probably now I think they are definitely the largest gateways to data in any customer-facing application or any customer-facing infrastructure that we have within our organization.
And they're meant to be for ease of use, ease of access.
Ease of access by mobile apps that use APIs to communicate with backends and exchange data with databases and so on that are behind those backends. It's used by third parties to provide them a mechanism to interact with an organization from a business to business perspective. And other third parties, right? So third party access to data in the environment. But APIs are everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And AI is no different, right? So a lot of people think AI is this black box of technology, but when it comes back to what AI systems are built up of, guess what they're built up of? They're built up of applications, APIs, data, and identities and access management to make it all work in hopefully some sort of secure manner, all right? And people forget that. So I think sometimes they think it's this black box. So all the threats that apply to applications, right? All the threats that apply, well-published threats that apply to APIs, right? Well, I think most viewers that are in the application security domain or landscape will be familiar with the OWASP top 10 model for applications and APIs, the top 10 threats that those technologies face. It's no different for AI, right? There's still valid attacks against a chatbot, against a prompting mechanism that you type in your prompt to, right? They're just applications that use APIs behind them to communicate with the large language model that's sitting behind it. So they're all still exposed to all these attacks. And APIs is definitely, API exploits is definitely, very, very applicable to, AI environments, and making sure that we recognize that, and defend those environments from AI, API-based attacks, just as we do any application that we're publicizing externally.
So, as we're getting towards the end of the interview, I always like to ask about the future. So, if you peer into the crystal ball, and I know if we knew the answers, we'd all be on a beach in the Bahamas somewhere with a pina colada. But what are your predictions on how Gen AI, machine learning, criminal activity, cybersecurity, and more will evolve over the next few years through to 2030? Sounds like a good milestone year
Yeah.
to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, interesting question, right? And I mean, yeah, everyone would love to have a crystal ball,
Yeah.
including myself. But look, I mean, I think there's a few things here, right? I mean, I think generative AI specifically, which, the broader population globally is now familiar with, I think it's definitely going to mature, and hopefully produce some, more sane results, and less hallucinations, right?
Yeah.
But that'll progress over the next, I think, probably 3 to 4 years. But there's a very real possibility that the technology that's used for generative AI, i.e., the underlying transformer technology, may actually hit its limits, right? So some people are predicting that through the current Gen AI progress, we're gonna get to, you know, um, you know,
Some sort of
super,
endpoint, because we need to
some sort
go
of
from
super, some sort of super intelligence,
yeah,
right?
we need to
Super
go from
intelligent
AI
AI.
to artificial general intelligence and then artificial super
Yeah, right.
intelligence. And those
So
are very different things.
they are, and I think, it's possible that we'll maybe get to the artificial general intelligence, but personally, I think we're going to see some real limitations in the underlying technology to really be able to progress it further than that. Certainly beyond 10 years. I mean, one example is just the insane amount of power, right? Electricity that it's going to take, and hardware, compute power, to actually probably get there, right? Even with the advent of quantum computing and initiatives like that, the amount of power that's going to be necessary in order to drive all this. I think someone did an estimation of just to reach the first step in this, it's going to consume something like the entire amount of power that New York City currently consumes, right? And
I
it's
read
only going to
concerns. I read concerns that the U.S. electricity grid, isn't strong enough after years of
uh,
spending money on foreign wars. They should have been building up their own grids in their own
so I
country.
think
It needs massive upgrades to
so
cope.
I think the vendors that, the main players in AI today, you'll probably see them diverge into investing in power type
I
investments.
only read today
No
that
doubt, right?
nuclear in overseas, the companies that have nuclear power are doing deals with data centers for AI. And I was remarking, well, thank goodness we're getting nuclear in Australia, so because we're going to need all of this as well.
Yeah. Well, so that I think is going to be the stumbling block. It'll certainly slow things down, I think. From that perspective. But again, I think there is going to be some underlying technology, limitations that we see, or thresholds that we reach where, we can't progress much further with the current line of generative AI and the technology that's being used to drive it. The other thing, from a crystal ball perspective, is I think, there's no doubt that the game of cat and mouse between cyber criminals and cyber security vendors like Imperva, like Thales, are going to continue. But what AI is going to do is accelerate the different types of threats, or the modification of existing threats, like you were talking about earlier. The OpenSSH vulnerability that's been now realized again is essentially another variant of one that already existed. AI is going to help cyber criminals uncover all these different variants, right?
And to try
And
and hopefully lock them down to say, well, this was a variant. Are there any other ways that this can be?
yeah,
That cat and mouse game is never ending.
it's a cat and mouse game, and I think, you can only fight it with AI. So,
Yeah.
you need to fight AI with AI. So, if you look at it, I guess the future, and if I was an organization, if I was a CISO or a CIO, I would be making sure that my technology choices for defending my environment from cyber attacks obviously had a very well thought out roadmap for AI if they don't already have AI embedded within the controls and the technology being used, because that is the only way you're gonna keep up with this cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my last couple of questions that I'd like to end on. Can you please share a memory of your first personal computer?
Wow. I mean, this might really show my age too, eh? But yeah, look, I think I reeled back the clock in my mind just then, and I think it was a VIC 20, so a Commodore VIC 20, which then I think progressed to a Commodore
It
64 and
did.
then
It
an
did. Yeah.
Amiga,
Yeah.
which I had all of. But it reels back to my probably just pre-teen days,
Yeah.
early teen days. But yeah, I mean, the thrill for those sort of early computers for me was the gaming that it provided, right?
For
I'm not so
everybody,
much.
typing in all the
Oh,
instructions from the
uh,
the magazines and the tapes.
yeah, well, not so much of a gamer today, but certainly back then I was very inquisitive, not just in computing, but in many different areas. I always liked to delve into whatever it was and unpack it, right, to understand how it worked. And it was no different with, the VIC 20, the first computer I had, understanding how sprite graphics worked, right, from a
Mm.
programmatic perspective. So I got into that at a very early age. And yeah, I mean, that progressed to, me ending up, I guess, where I am today, because the path I took was through high school doing computer science at I think one of the first schools in Victoria, Australia, East Doncaster Secondary College, it is now, but they were one of the first to offer computer science in year 11 and year 12 as a VCE, or HSC, it was known back then,
Yeah.
subject. And that, sprawled on to me doing computer science at university and yeah, really effectively ended up today where I am today because of that. And all through encouragement from my then computer science teacher, I guess, back in high
Yeah.
school. He was a bit of a quirky guy, but he certainly had a passion for computer science himself, or I guess he wouldn't have been in the position he was in. But yeah, he inspired me to go down that path. Yeah.
And was he or anyone else in your life a source of great advice that you've received to help you get where you are today?
Look, I mean, I think there's no particular person, but I think there's more industry influences. Like in the early days, obviously Microsoft was a big one. Bill Gates, and what he did for the desktop computing industry and just computing in general. But yeah, I mean, no real person specifically, I think that's
Yeah.
guided me. I
Look, it
mean,
was
I've picked
more
up.
to. I mean, only because you mentioned him, and the question is more about what is some of the great advice that you've received in life to help you get where you
Yeah,
are
I mean,
today.
from that perspective, I mean, yeah, I mean, certainly, keep learning, right? Regardless of the age you are and the comfort level you are at currently, because I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I got is that you will not learn to a satisfactory degree or experience new things if you don't put yourself outside your comfort zone. So, I've very purposely always done that from probably an early age, where, I'll always delve into things that are brand new to me, right? I'm not an expert in the field, but through interacting with, an understanding of how things work at a deep level, yeah, I've gained my own experience and my own, I guess, learning experiences through taking that approach. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is your final message to the viewers and the readers?
Well, when it comes to AI and specifically generative AI, certainly look at the business benefits that it can, produce for your organization, but also don't forget about the cyber threats, right? Many organizations delve into it and implement AI systems within their infrastructure without really considering what the cyber threats are to that infrastructure that they're standing up. And they need to understand that and make sure they've got the right people, processes, and technology controls in being able to defend against cyber attacks that specifically target AI infrastructure, AI systems. But I think also when as a last piece of advice, when it comes to AI and where we are today, I think both organisations and just general people themselves that are using generative AI would hugely benefit to do some sort of prompt engineering course, right? Understand prompt engineering is a lot deeper than a lot of people probably give it credit for.
Realize, yeah.
There's a lot of things you can do if you understand prompt engineering that you typically wouldn't as a general user of, say, ChatGPT or a chatbot would even get to doing, right? But the value of prompt engineering moving forward from both a personal perspective, but also from a possibly an employment perspective, is going to be beneficial, right? If you can invest in that area yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, asking the right question, whether it's knowing how to ask the right questions of Google or of people in life or of your AI is super important. I mean, otherwise it's garbage in, garbage out. And then, of course, trusting those responses is only possible after you've done all of the work that you need to do to verify those outputs. Because as it always says at the bottom of almost every AI, verify outputs,
Yeah. They're very, very clear about that, and
Yeah.
so they
Well, they
should
had to
be.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Reinhart Hansen, the Director of Technology in the Office of the CTO for Imperva, now at Thales Company. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today about AI, about security, about bad bots, about your platform, and everything else that we spoke about. And I do hope we can speak again in the future.
It was a pleasure, Alex. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully, who knows, maybe we can do this again sometime in the future, right? Maybe a
Yeah,
slightly different topic. But yeah, it was great.
absolutely.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Cheers.